We have a robust agenda today, so I'm going to get us started. I will start with our good morning. Welcome to the Technologist Community's kickoff event sponsored by Graybox. I am Kara Toronto, the Chief Operations Officer here at TAO. I use she, her pronouns, and I am thrilled to have you all here with us today. I will say that we would much rather be in person, but we're going to do the best that we can in our Zoom room. So I have Ruthie Ditzler with me today. She's TAO's Marketing and Regional Programs Manager. She's providing the back-end Zoom support. And if you have any questions or comments during today's events, please feel free to post them in the public chat or send them to Ruthie directly. We are being recorded, so if you don't want a question associated with you, that's the best way to have it done anonymously. So if you click Zoom reminders as we get started, we put all of our participants on mute, more for background noises, dogs barking, leaf blowers, etc., that we've all heard. So we ask that you remain on mute until a TAO staff member unmutes you or calls on you to talk. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. And we welcome you to join us on camera during today's events so that our panelists can actually connect with the audience and they're not just speaking into a blank void. So I'm going to encourage you to engage with TAO on social media today and throughout the event and after. We do have a person behind the social media. It's Ruthie, who you just met. We love to see our key takeaways that participants post, and it helps others learn more about these community events. I think I've mentioned this already, but one additional item to note, we're recording today's session and we will upload to our YouTube channel. So please feel free to share the recording with other folks in your dev and engineering network. Okay, now I get to take my breath from my script and say I'd like to invite our community co-chairs to say a few words. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Nadya Boone, VP of Product at DAT Freight and Analytics, and Dahv Kliner, VP of Fiber Laser Technology at Enlight. So I will hand it over to y'all.
Great. Well, I'll kick us off. It's really exciting to have the first meeting of our rebooted technology group. And Dahv and I had a lot of fun thinking about the opportunity and possibility of this group. It's a broad technology charter. It's, there's so many technology groups that focus on one particular type of technology, a special language or silicon wafers or whatever. I mean, there's lots of things going on in Oregon around technology. So we really thought about the things that unite us. And I think one of the things that unites us as technologists is our curiosity. We may have had to specialize as our careers move on, but I think a lot of us are nerds at heart, and this is a chance where we can come together to learn and geek out together and keep our eyes on the horizon past just the particular silos that maybe we're working in. And another area that we think will be deeply interesting to this community is how technology affects those around us. You cannot read the news today without encountering stories about how technology affects the people and communities, whether for good or for ill. And I think this is a chance for us to also come together and engage with some of those bigger topics that regardless of whether your technology is like ski boots or software, right? All of us are affecting those around us. So I'm really excited about this, looking forward to get to know more people through this. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dahv.
Hey, thanks, Nadya. First, I also want to thank everyone for showing up to the inaugural event. Of course, we all like to do things in person, but that's, the virus doesn't allow that. And so we're still all happy to be able to connect with you virtually. I agree with everything Nadya said about our motivations and how we want to structure the community. When I I've been in this area for 9 years. Before that, I was in the Bay Area, and before that, all over. And when I look at all my sort of career twists and turns, mostly positive, I realized they were sort of all enabled by my network, and not just the people I know, helping me or teaching me or working closely with me, but just they let me know about opportunities or even technologies I had never heard of. And so we realizing how important that is, we wanted to support such a network here. And then also, as Nadya said, the broader community, the company I'm at, Enlight, many years ago before I got here, started an organization, nonprofit called EnConnect, where we put engineers they volunteer in local high schools to help the students and the teachers, and that's been really effective. And so we think this community would also like to know about sort of volunteer opportunities where they could help out or contribute to their broader community. And so the activities we have in mind are speakers and panels like we'll see today, networking events in person also when we're able to, field trips, again, when COVID allows, where we can actually get together and go, see something and learn about something interesting, and again, volunteer opportunities. So that's a pretty broad charter. So I'd just like to invite everyone to make suggestions. Nadya and I would love to hear, and TAO would love to hear what people would like in terms of specific activities or opportunities that we can share. So thanks, and thank you to TAO for all the work organizing this.
Oh, well, awesome. And thank you both. You're technologists in this community that I greatly respect, and it's awesome to have you all engaged. And we'll make sure we drop in the chat the direct link to the Technologist community at TAO, and you can sign up for any newsletters to hear about upcoming events for this group specifically, particularly, as Dahv said, as we get back in person. So now I'd like to invite the team from Graybox to share a few words as the presenting sponsor of the Technologist community, not just for today, but moving into next year as well. So I will pause and invite Graybox up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kara, Nadya, Dahv, the TAO team, and of course, all of our esteemed panelists today. I'm going to be really brief to give the most time to this great conversation that's going to follow here. But my name's Sol Crawford. I'm an account strategist here at Graybox. If you don't know us, we're a full service digital agency that's based in Portland that for the past 12 years has been supporting companies from local businesses to Fortune 500 to meet your digital needs in the areas of strategy, technology, creative, and marketing. We believe a digital first approach should be people-centered. So we're thrilled to be supporting partnerships, projects, and this technologist group here today, where important conversations like these that will shape a more equitable future in tech are taking place. So if you like what you hear today, we'd love to hear from you, but I'm gonna pass it off to the folks that you're really here to hear from. So thanks so much.
Thank you. And I am going to hand it right over to our moderator, Sarah Murray, the Executive Creative Director at Graybox, to get this thing started. And we're like 30 seconds ahead of schedule. I love that.
Oh, wow, 30 seconds. Well, thank you so much to Kara and all of the Technology Association of Oregon. This is a topic very near and dear to my heart. And I am just so thrilled to have all the panelists here with us today. So to introduce them, I wanted to start by a very general question that can help us understand each of the panelists a little bit better and their unique perspectives on inclusion. So starting with Krista, since you're on the left of the screen, in what ways do you see technology differently through your lens of inclusion and accessibility in your work?
So hi everyone, thanks Sarah for having me go first. My name's Krista, and in my role, I'm the Director of Digital Strategy here at R West. We're another integrated agency. So my lens is what I like to think of as more of a conduit. So I mean, strategically and systemically, it's the right thing to do to think about usability and web accessibility, whether you think about them separately or together, and they blend very well. But I have this fundamental responsibility to bridge that gap between our creative team, who's thinking of all these wonderful, beautiful things or even words to put out into the universe and that messaging, and then make sure that that gets communicated really well over to our in-house development team. So it's something hard to put into words of like, it's just the ethos of how I think about web accessibility and usability as I move the teams forward through a product development or a project, or even how we even think about working together. One of my other favorite things to think about is how can you be creative or work on something in the confines of 9 to 5? We have to be sensitive even to folks that may do better work during the wee hours of the morning or later in the day. I mean, even that outside of the actual practicality of technology in itself is some way to think about being accessible to someone, or having usability being around that. So I could talk about this forever, but Sarah, did you want me to pass to someone, or do I pass it back to you?
I got this. So Jillian is experiencing what we all have lived with, a little Zoom Fun. So Greg, would you mind answering the same question?
Sure. So my name is Greg Geffrin, and I definitely view things through inclusivity through the lens of processes that are not inclusive and how that affects the communities that should be included. So I started a company called Merify, which is a hiring and career growth platform, and our main intent is leveling the playing field in that area. Right now, each step of the hiring process relies on self-promotion tactics and various assessment tests. And those are not only really bad predictors of future on-the-job performance, but they cater to specific personality types while absolutely alienating other types. And what's worse, they lead to interviews where both sides are starting from zero. So candidates have to reprove themselves at every interview, and interviewers form their whole opinion of candidates just from their in-person interaction. And that's where a lot of bias, unconscious bias, can creep in. In my personal experience, I'm a very anxious person. And it gets a lot worse in situations where I feel like I can look like I don't know what I'm talking about, like being on a panel, for example. So I always have like tactics around interviews. I always take the first offer that I'm given. I stay at jobs longer than I should. And that's terrible for my career, but that's what I do. And my last interview, I just talked and talked and talked, and no one had time to answer any questions or ask me any questions. So I was like, perfect. And that worked, but you shouldn't have to have tactics to get hired for a job that you're a good fit for. It should be something that is just a natural thing. So at Merify, we're operating on the concept that you've already proven yourself. We're trying to create a new language around community-based, quantitative, and vetted skill data. There's no text in our system, so you don't have to take a course on how to optimize keywords, because there are no keywords. You won't be asked like technical questions. No one's going to ask you what a closure is, and you'll get a clear understanding of your strengths out of it. We did a lot of user discovery early on in our process, and we continue to do that. And across the board, people always underrate themselves on how they perform in skills, and their peers think they're doing a lot better. And that's extremely useful information. If you think you're here and everyone else knows you're here, then you can say, look, I actually have confidence now. I actually feel like I'm doing better than I thought I was. That's very important information to level the playing field. And then also, interviews can start with an existing understanding. There's a common language now. So that can limit testing that happens at interviews, that can limit interview length, and it can limit the window for unconscious bias to make its way into the process. And I didn't get into the details of how our company works, because then I would talk for even longer. So I'm terrible at elevator pitches, so I'll stop it there.
Thank you, Greg. Jillian?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I was having a little technical challenges earlier, but hopefully we're all good now. I'm Jillian Hayes. I am first and foremost a researcher who focuses on technology and accessibility, and spends my time doing design and trying to think how we can bring all of the voices of these great people into our design processes. So that's where I spend a lot of my time, is thinking about those kinds of things and how we can teach our students to do this kind of work as well. The last 2 years, I've taken on the role that you see on the slide there, which is being in charge of graduate education on campus here at UC Irvine. And that has changed my view of accessibility in some really interesting ways, kind of along the lines of some of the things Greg was just talking about, of lifting up and thinking about our organizations and how do we change not just the technologies to allow people to adapt to these sort of inaccessible organizations and worlds, but how do we change the whole space? And in the spirit of never let a good crisis go to waste, what I'm working on right now is thinking a lot about how what we learned about remote learning in the last 2 years can be used to radically change the way we think about accommodations and accessibility in our classrooms. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Shaler?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. No relation. Thank you. Online ADA, we help large and small organizations with their digital assets to become accessible. Organizations from Walmart and Bank of America to even locally Bethel School District. And, I think a lot of people look at accessibility in an extreme sense of people missing limbs or being blind completely. And there's so many people that have a moderate disability. So, you know, my mom, she's 65, and she's, you know, needs glasses, and so using the internet sometimes can be challenging, and it's such a, we wouldn't consider that a disability, but accessibility can make it easier for her to engage across the internet. And so there's such a spectrum, and we like to look at it, well, let me give an example is, you know, there's people that are temporarily disabled or recovering from surgery maybe, or people who aren't actually disabled but having like a technical disability. You jump into a cafe, you got to print a resume, you're late for an interview, and the mouse isn't working. You know, can I tab through this software to get to the print button, for example? And so, you know, we kind of try to look at it like, you know, it's not the person that's disabled, it's probably the technology. You know, I mean, disability is, it, you know, is the person disabled? I look at it as, you know, they're inconvenienced by society and technology, and so it's our responsibility to convenience these folks so that they can engage.
Yeah, I think that's such a great perspective, because this notion that a disability is like a permanent part of someone's existence or part of their identity versus it's simply a state where you're less able to use your technology.
Absolutely. And so, you know, we look at it like, you know, accessibility, grammar and punctuation can be an accessibility issue. A lot of people wouldn't think of those things, but color contrast, you know, for people vision impaired, tab navigation, making your software available to alternative inputs. This isn't just a matter of accommodating people with disability. It's making sure that anybody in any situation can engage with your business, with your products and services.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to just follow up with that with you, Greg. What do you think is the impact when technology is inaccessible or non-inclusive?
Sure. First of all, I love the various responses, whether it be from the perspective of disability or from the perspective of just a non-inclusive process, which is what I tend to focus on. So it's great to hear about all the different aspects of this topic. From my perspective, as far as, you know, Merify is trying to improve the process for hiring, making that more inclusive. But in that, and that was based on my own experience, but the process of creating a startup has really revealed itself as an extremely non-inclusive process. The amount of personal risk involved is enormous. The amount of time you have to spend, the amount of capital you have to spend, that results in a tiny percentage of people who can participate in this process. Even our company, not immune to that. We only exist. We would have been another unexplored idea if it wasn't for our getting unemployment, for my partner getting a severance package, and it shouldn't take like a magical confluence of events for you to be able to participate in a process. And what do we lose as a result of this? All these, and the majority of equally good ideas go completely unexplored. We're crushing innovation because only a tiny percentage of people can actually participate. And it's an entirely fixable thing. If you focus on removing risk from the equation, if you start with ideas at their infancy, if you provide a salary for people who are working on the ideas, on building them out, if you have a pipeline of developers, of lawyers, of advisors available to these people, then you can, and there's plenty of money to do that. I mean, think of how much money VC firms make. If they direct some of that money towards addressing this problem, then the process is more inclusive and everyone benefits.
Krista, what are your thoughts on this?
So when technology is inaccessible or non-inclusive, it affects the bottom line ultimately. And what I mean by that is it's financially affects, let's say, you know, I work for an agency. If we don't build a inclusive product or launch a website that has this baked into it, like this ethos, it's expensive. It causes, I mean, anything from tech debt over to a client that can't use the product very well because it's for their consumers and their users ultimately, right? And that's an expensive aspect of it. The other side of the coin of when I talk about the bottom line is when you're not inclusive in the process or even in your internal working sessions and collaborations with ideas with your own team, you start to alienate other folks and have these unconscious biases. And even in that self can be an expensive way, because losing people within your organization that can bring value, that have different opinions or different life experiences, is a sense of it's not inclusive, and therefore tying it back to being affecting the bottom line ultimately. I tried to think of a way to answer this question maybe a little bit differently than my other peers on the panel, because I would probably say a lot of the same things that Greg and Shayla and Jillian would say. So I thought about from a billable perspective, from an agency organization perspective, from things that I manage, where I'm trying to connect the dots of all of an integrated approach to going to market or campaign planning for clients. Like if we're not inclusive within our technology and our teamwork together and who we put on these teams to create the technology, what does that ultimately mean? And I keep coming back to like, it's just an expensive thing. And it's so easy to just pause for a moment and be inclusive and think about all the various scenarios for people to actually use XYZ product or engage with XYZ video or even, I don't know, paid ad, right? There's no reason why we can't transcribe any of that stuff so it's available to everybody.
Thank you. And what are some of the effective ways you found for advocating for prioritizing that inclusive design and development approach, Greg and Jillian?
Jillian, you want to go first? Oh, okay. I mean, we started off with that being the core of our product, so there's not much advocating that's really necessary, but we have found that a lot of, I think it's a question of visibility in a lot of cases. People are not like maliciously ignoring it, but it's just not visible. Maybe they're not, and this is true of myself in a lot of cases, they're not aware that something is not being as inclusive as it is. And one way to make it more visible is to do a lot of continuous user and customer discovery. Have people interact with your products, get responses to how your system is working, how your product is working, and elevate visibility. And once you've elevated visibility, that can often lead to change in the process. And then another thing we've done, we partnered really early on with a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm. And that has been super valuable for us. We learned a lot. We wanted to make sure that we weren't exacerbating an already bad problem, but we also want to make sure that we're moving it in the right direction too. We came up, we did a brainstorming session with them and came up with a lot of great ideas on how we could improve things. So that's also been very effective.
So I definitely want to plus one what Greg said about evidence and visibility. When I do consulting work and I get brought into places that are maybe not interested in accessibility, I spend a lot of time showing and doing things like making someone use their own interface with a screen reader or things like that, where they may have just never seen it at all. But in a broader notion, I think advocating for accessibility is not unlike advocating for anything else. And so what I think about a lot when I go into these kinds of negotiations, and as you might imagine, I'm sort of middle management at a university, which means I spend a lot of time in negotiations. I really try to think about what matters to the actual people that I'm trying to change their opinions. And so I want to pull back to what Krista said in the last question about money, right? Sometimes what matters is we're going to make some profit here, or we're going to save some money or whatever. And if that's what matters to that person, that's what I spend my time on and not the other things. For some people, and this is definitely true in universities and government agencies and so on, law is the thing. So if I can find a way in which we're violating some kind of inclusion or disability law, then that's pretty easy to get people's attention. In some cases, it's about reputation. Do you want the bad press of being the people with the deeply inaccessible interface or with the content that people can't get? And then when all else fails, I go to the sort of morality piece, right? You need to care about other people. And here's how I'm going to talk to you about caring about other people. But never do I use all of those things at once. It's always a matter of targeting what is the person you're talking to really interested in.
So a user-centric approach to how you sell accessible usability. I love it. So when an organization makes their product or workplace more inclusive, what are those benefits?
Yeah, I think in a capitalist society, of course, the monetary benefit is what's brought up most often. What Krista was saying is, and a company will evaluate their investment into accessibility against what they stand to gain. I think we should ask, what's the consequence of not being accessible? And particularly for schools or universities, not being able to log in and get your grades and your test scores apparent, maybe for a grade school student, not being able to engage with their student at that kind of level can have dire consequences, at such an impressionable age. And so, whether you're an organization or a for-profit business, I feel like the real question is, what are the consequences of not,
Yeah, so totally agree with what Taylor said. And we see consequences all over the place, right? You see the bad press, you see the angry parents, you see the products that don't sell because people can't use them, and so on. And I think that's a huge, really important point. I also think I'm so glad, Sarah, that you framed this as about products and workplaces, because I'm certainly a person who believes, well, inclusion in the workplace won't fix everything. If we had more inclusive workplaces, our products would by default become more inclusive. And so I love that notion of, how do we change organizations that can work for a whole bunch of different kinds of bodies and a whole bunch of different kinds of brains, and that think and behave differently, which then allows our product teams to just think about things they might not have otherwise, whether it's how something looks to a certain racial or ethnic or gender group, or whether it's about disability status. If you have those people at the table and part of the conversation, you are going to much earlier in your design process start to think about products that are going to work for those folks. And it's not so much a Band-Aid where you're calling in people like us, where things are already broken and they're coming back and like, why is this broken? It's way easier to start earlier. And I love, what Greg's been saying about building his company from the ground up to work this way. I think that's a really special and unique way to do things.
So this could be monumental, right? There are so many different approaches to inclusion and accessibility, like Jillian was just touching on. Like, is it disability status? Is it gender expression? Is it identity based in your culture or your background? Where can an organization really start?
Well, I think Jillian was totally on point leading into this question. Is it should be from design, right? So from inception. And actually, most organizations will find that when they design for accessibility, their project from the get-go, instead of doing it as an afterthought, it's actually much more cost effective. So when we have organizations trying to retrofit software and websites or mobile apps for accessibility, the cost is monumental compared to if they would have spent the time considering accessibility from the get-go. And I guess and so we're all in favor for a design first approach. Now, if you're trying to retrofit, I would go from the surface level down. So visuals, color contrasts, these things, moving to alternative inputs, and then code level.
Krista, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, Shaylor, I'm just like processing everything you're saying. I'm thinking about my own just former life of producing like web specific projects, and two industries come to mind that just always stick out, is one being healthcare and another one financial services. And you had talked about starting first with design. I would even go as far as to, if we could involve the client within like what we call a discovery process, where we're actually talking to them about their internal pain points and then getting them on board with talking to their actual consumers or their users or their patients or whatever throughout their journey. Specifically with healthcare, when we do like user interviews and user research before we even go to the drawing board, we find that people, when they're searching for a service or a provider, they're in a state of almost crisis. And so you need to be thoughtful of getting them through the journey really fast and being mindful of even everything from colors to even the button CTAs and what wording is used. Of let's make this an experience where you feel confident you can get the healthcare services you need. On the flip side of like a big financial project, we learn a lot that stakeholders internally want to tout all this stuff and put all these images everywhere and want parallax and things flying in and out, and people just want to get to their freaking online banking, right? Like, and it's a really interesting notion that what is design, and we have to like do a lot of education with our main stakeholders to get them to truly understand the internet and your website is for everyone else. I mean, yes, you're paying the bills, and yes, it's for you as well and your company, but in reality, it's for everyone else. And how do they use it?
Can I ask a question?
Always.
And I think a lot of people have an answer to it. I wouldn't ask anything. So for a new company, for example, what are some ways that you can, because at new companies, every dollar counts. What are some ways that you can incorporate this kind of design practice and get past the notion that this is going to cost? I mean, I can fix it later. This is going to cost time now and money now, which I don't have. Like, how do you get past that hurdle?
I think that hurdle, that's the same thing as saying we need a website and, gosh, are we going to actually have to pay for this thing? I mean, you're going to have to assess those. I just don't see how accessibility is an option. I mean, that's like saying, well, just type up something and don't bother proofreading it and post it on the internet. Who cares? It's kind of, if you're not going to spend the time for accessibility, it's going to show that the unprofessionalism that maybe you don't care about certain people, and maybe not to others, but to the people who have the accessibility problem. They're going to come to your business and they're going to see roadblocks, and it's going to infer that lack of consideration, and they'll go elsewhere. So I don't know at this point, as awareness grows of accessibility, that a business could afford not to. There's a growing level of understanding in the development community for accessibility. And so if I was a startup, if I was hiring a web development or software development agency or freelancer, finding one that has accessibility skills would be imperative. I just don't see that there's an alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. So here in magical theoretical land, I want to give a couple of you a magic wand. And if you could just go out in the world and change one thing to make it more inclusive and accessible, what might that be?
Empathy. Literally, just like just waving the wand and giving more empathy to everyone that's involved in the creation from concept to finish. When you're able-bodied or an able mind, and you can whip through a website or read something really well, you're not thinking of how others might perceive it, and that's at the root level starts with just human empathy. I thought about if I had a magic wand and I could change technology, and I'm like, no, it's actually the humans I would change.
I love that response, Krista. I really didn't like this question when I first heard it, because I think, how do you judge, one person's a disability over another and pick or choose? But it's actually a much broader question. And I think one thing I'd like to point out, that I think it's deplorable that major platforms on the internet to this day, not to point fingers, Facebook, these kinds of platforms that have endless supplies of money are tremendously inaccessible. It's outrageous. So I would probably choose that. It's like these major platforms with big dollars doing almost nothing for accessibility. It's deplorable.
It's like they need a bit of accountability.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of like they're too big to sue. Like nobody wants to sue a company worth billions because, they'd just be tied up in red tape for so long. So I think that that's how these organizations kind of skirt that, at least for the time being.
I was saying, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was two things. One is I was going to note that everyone's making the meta joke in the chat, which I have to say was top of my mind, was that Krista and Shaler have both given us meta comments about accessibility, and then we talked about Meta, the company. So there you go. But I actually do have like a very practical thing that I want, which is I want every interface everywhere to be able to be used with a keyboard only. And the fact that mouse interaction is still required in so many places to me is baffling. We could easily do this. The internet started in a world in which we were keyboard only. So that's the first thing I want. And the other thing that I want is at the other end of that, which is just deep attention to multimodality. There is no reason in today's day and age that we can't make things all voice and sound interactive, tactile interactive, keyboard only, keyboard and mouse, et cetera, and just thinking about all the modes of interaction. So that's my very pragmatic, down to earth, on the ground magic wand request.
Would it be crazy if I answered my own question?
Go for it.
Okay. So I'm clearly a designer. I've been talking with my students about typography and legibility. And one article I really enjoy is the web is 95% words. And if it's not legible, what are you doing? And it's such a fundamental thing. Like Gutenberg's press was in 1450, and we're still having conversations about, is it legible?
I really love what Krista said. I think this is empathy is at its core. I think whether you're talking about interface or whether you're talking about participation in a process, just because something is working for you doesn't mean it's working for everyone. And you need to think about people that might not be included in a process that may be benefiting you, but not benefiting everyone.
Yeah, and Sarah, I love what you said. I think a lot of people, even us industry folks, we get so buried in major accessibility issues that, it's always such a good reminder that language is kind of the first level. And, if your website, like I actually had mentioned earlier, spelling, grammar, translations, having your content translated into multiple languages, that is, that's an accessibility issue, a big one, actually.
Absolutely. So I'm hoping that from today, people are coming away feeling inspired to reinvigorate their inclusion and accessibility efforts. It's a big job to be done, and we need everybody involved to make the world a more accessible place. So for those who are like, yes, I'm ready to go forth, what are some inclusive design or accessibility resources that they might follow up with?
This is what we do, so I'm going to jump in, and a few shameless plugs. We're part of the W3C consortium that writes the web content accessibility guidelines. The W3C has tremendous resources and information online. Of course, get familiar with the WCAG. We also are actually launching a toolbox, tools for developers, designers, for digital agencies to complete their accessibility work. You can pre-register for a free account for that software at allytoolbox.io. We also have a great YouTube channel where we walk through in layman's terms the WCAG guidelines and such. So I would recommend checking those out.
Thank you so much for making so many resources, Shaler.
Second that. I was gonna from my perspective, I like to collude with other experts, and I'm a champion of this. Do I tell clients like I am the actual web accessibility expert? No, I know enough to know that it's important. I know how to connect the dots. So hiring a company like Shaler's or partnering with Shaler and then utilizing all those other tools out there. There's so many free tools for us to use as well if you want to just get started there. My agency personally, we partner with a firm called Level Access, and they're top notch as well. And we partner with them everything to even from legal stuff over to like just basic site checker tools. So if you have that at your disposal to kind of talk to your C-suite or your partners or whoever's, you know, investing in these tools, I highly recommend them as well.
Thank you. So are any of the members of the audience have any pressing questions they want to share?
We have one ask Sarah of, can the links to the resources that everyone's talking about be shared in the chat?
I see Shaler in there already. Krista, can you share your links?
I have a question, if that's okay. So I have to hop out for a meeting. I'm glad I got past this real quick, and I'm probably gonna have to leave because my meeting starts in 2 minutes. But I'd imagine there's a lot of partner feedback on, you know, it costs more to make the website accessible. And so what are some of the challenges that y'all are seeing? And then how are you responding to the partner to communicate the value that that investment adds? Thank you so much for the presentation too. Sorry that I have to leave right as I'm getting my answer.
I can answer that really quickly, but then those who actually run agencies should really dig in deeper. But I will just go back to the sort of how do we negotiate? So everything costs money, everything. And so if you're going to ask, well, it costs more money to have a responsive website, or it costs more money to do mobile first, but also have a desktop version, on and on it goes. Everything costs money. We're all making choices. So what you have to think about is, how do we make accessibility a thing that can't be dropped from that list, that really has to be a first order priority? And always for me, it goes back to, how much money are you going to lose because you're going to lose those customers? How much money are you going to lose because you're going to get in a legal lawsuit with someone? How much money are you going to lose because you have bad press? All, you know, that run down the list of things that they care about. And we're always making trade-offs, but this is one that needs to be prioritized.
Yeah, and even in small businesses, I think they underestimate how much money they're losing because of inaccessible content. So you build a mobile app or a website, even average life 5 years. Even if you make a $10,000 investment in retrofitting accessibility, you know, you should see that come back. I mean, it really is one of those issues that the sooner you do it, the sooner you're gonna get the rewards from that inclusion. I mean, how many times have you seen somebody try to use a website, get frustrated at something that's not working, and bail? It happens all the time. And so it doesn't just have to be people with disabilities that are affected. Everyday users may be having usability issues, and all of these would be identified and resolved through accessibility remediation.
Absolutely. I know that drop-off rates are something we definitely are held beholden to. You know, engagement rates and your usability issues are going to show up in those metrics, but it's not going to be clear that usability is the factor, but you sure can make a great guess if you haven't considered usability and accessibility along the way.
Oh, that, and somebody just mentioned in the chat, yeah, you know, you can also avoid litigation. It costs a lot of the clients that we work with, you know, if they approach us before litigation, they're spending less on accessibility than just consulting their legal team. So,
Yep.
You know, the preventative, let alone a settlement or, you know, a drag out court case. So
Shout out to Jacob for dropping the Domino's case. Before Domino's, I always leaned on Target. I don't know if any folks know the Target story, but they literally, all they had to do is put alt tags on their images. And when I share that story, usually it's like at a kickoff or at some point where it's appropriate with the client, we got enough rapport, it just blows their mind that like It was just literally having someone do content entry, describing an image to someone so a screen reader could use it, and they had to pay how many dollars for that? So that resonates really well on the client side of things when you bring up folks like Domino's and folks like Target.
Well, litigation's rising by over 800% per year, year after year. I mean, it's not a matter of, I think for most organizations, it's not a matter of if you would get sued, it's when, and there's this perception that it's like predatory lawyers or maybe somebody with a disability going on a rampage suing people. A lot of the people, I mean, we get to know people going to conventions and stuff, and there are lawyers out there who are disability advocates. I mean, they're filing lawsuits against major organizations so that they do get accessible. I mean, they're advocating for accessibility. So, you know, it's kind of a, if you're ignoring accessibility, if you haven't tested your workflows, if you haven't tested alternate inputs, if you're blatantly not accessible, I mean, it's just probably a matter of time. I mean, sushi restaurants, I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. We had a client who had a sushi restaurant who's had 2 accessibility lawsuits. So, you know, it can be anybody.
Yeah.
I think some of the things you mentioned before, Taylor, are really important. Providing tools so that people can more quickly become compliant with you know, be more accessible, become compliant with laws. Because I mean, I know it's hard for you know, to hear that people might have like a monetary concern about something, but like think of a sushi restaurant and think of them. They're not going to immediately think of accessibility as a priority. But if you make it something that's achievable for them, and show and explain to them the cost of not doing it, then it becomes more visible to them, and then it becomes a priority.
Yeah, if people don't know, sorry, Sarah, do we need to jump off this?
I would like to just give some other people a chance to ask their questions too. Jack, you've had your hand up for a while. Do you want to share your question?
Sure, thank you. So let me see if I can get this going. Okay. Yeah, so I have a question. This is a really interesting discussion. I work with the state of Oregon. And so in a large organization like the state of Oregon, we have hundreds of web editors. So I understand, you know, also having worked as a developer, that it's best to set something up in the first place and make sure that you're following accessibility best practices. But whenever you're talking about a large organization and sort of trying to move the needle there in terms of accessibility, and you know, you're not just thinking of the original layout and the original text that you're putting there, making sure it's accessible, inclusive, and, you know, in plain language, but you're also thinking of the day-to-day maintenance. And you're talking about people that might be administrative assistants or might be IT staff. So you have like a big range of people that can be web editors. What sort of strategies do you propose for that sort of thing? Would it make sense maybe starting with a maturity model? And if so, which one? You know, something that's maybe more encompassing than saying, here are tools, but then you have web editors that don't even know how to use them. They don't know why accessibility matters, etc.
I think I might be able to speak to this. This is something I've touched on a lot. I think going back to what the panel was saying, starting with a design that is fundamentally usable, you know, that design structure is accessible in its legibility. It is set up in such a way that it enforces the behavior that we want, like adding alt tags, uploading the script to a video to auto add subtitles. And then just like you would provide general CMS instruction to all of those that have access to that system, include those guidelines to make their content more accessible.
And Jack, I think your questions, you know, you have a lot of publishers, people publishing content on a website. You know, the left hand might not know what the right hand's doing. In that situation, I actually would recommend two of our tools. The accessibility toolbox that I mentioned at allytoolbox.io. It's actually the third iteration of that software, but we're launching it to the public for the first time. You can run an automated audit. So people who aren't familiar with compliance issues can run an audit, be part of a large organization, and should grab a lot of that low-hanging fruit of, like Sarah said, like alt tags and these code level compliance issues. Another thing to consider would be something, and I'm talking about automated remediation. Now, that's kind of controversial in our industry because we're launching tools that have AI and automation, and they can't catch everything all the time, of course. And that's why they're a little controversial, because some people believe in a all or nothing approach, like human-led auditing and 100% complete code compliance. But for a lot of small small businesses, they can't afford that. And in a situation like you're describing, you have a lot of publishers, and you may have somebody. Apologies, can you hear me now? I'm sorry, my headset just died. So you have organizations that can't keep track of all the content that's being published, or by people who don't know anything about accessibility, maybe a journalism major or an intern, or who knows, right? And so using a tool that leverages automation to catch that, quick to publish content could be in order. And there are a handful of overlay solutions that you might look at, but with the caution that they're not full compliance issues. You can't get an overlay. Ours is called Max Access, and it's going to catch the alt tags and those, textual code compliance, but it's not going to, it doesn't solve the whole problem. It doesn't do user flow testing. It doesn't check all ARIA situations. It doesn't understand, the nuance from one slider to another. So there are tools that can help, but you just have to be careful how you deploy them.
Yeah, I just want to jump in super quickly and just say, I agree, use all the tools, because you have to make it easier for your content creators. We saw, in the research, you can see a massive jump when Twitter started to embed your ability to alt text much more easily into their tools, and it used to be really, really hard to do. All of those things, this is what we're working on at universities right now, is how do we make it way easier on the faculty to actually make accessible content, because otherwise they're not going to do it. So we'd all love for everyone to just do the right thing, but anything you can do to help the people who are creating the content to do it is helpful.
Yeah. Now, I know all of you have really busy days, and hopefully you will just be out there being champions of accessibility for the rest of your workday and many more to come. We are running low on time, but Donica, I know you had a question. Christine, if you could drop them in chat here, Ruthie and Kara will help us get some inputs from our panelists. Also, if you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to them and do share your questions.
Yeah, we do still have 5 minutes, and I'd love Christine. She has a terminology question. So Christine, if you want to go, and then Donica, we can end with you. But Christine, what's your terminology question?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. So my question mainly is, how would you define inclusion versus accessibility? They're related, they're overlapped. I mean, I'm working on a design system deliverable and principles, and I don't want to have any assumptions there. So how would you define inclusion versus accessibility?
So I always say access is what lets us get to a thing. Inclusion is what actually makes us feel like a part of this and like we are at the same level as someone else. So I can give you access to a building with a wheelchair ramp way around the back that no one wants to use. That's really terrible. Or I can make an inclusive space in which there aren't a bunch of steps and everything is beautiful and the ramps are built into an architectural delight and you feel a part of the community. Hopefully that metaphor works for you.
Thank you, Jillian. Donica, what was your question?
Hi. Thanks for hosting this important discussion, by the way. I was wondering about basically these widgets that you can install on your website as, this kind of a cheap alternative I realize that these are more of like a stopgap than anything, but I was wondering just how effective you think they might actually be against lawsuits, and how you might respond to clients who might approach you with this as, the cheap, easy option.
Yeah, I would love to answer that. There's a lot of nuance, but organizations aren't being sued because I'm just getting a little echo. Anyway, organizations aren't being sued for little, an alt tag not being present on one page. They're being sued for mostly user flow issues. So think Domino's Pizza. I'm a blind user and I can't order a pizza. That's a substantial issue. So the overlays and widgets are great for catching a lot of surface level stuff. As I mentioned with Jack's question, that's great for auditing automation every 24 hours to catch like those alt tags. If you combine that with user flow testing and making sure that the primary functions of your website or your business are accessible, you're substantially reducing that risk of litigation. So, to be 100% compliant obviously reduces that risk to zero, but you can, through like an overlay or widget tool and some usability testing, substantially reduce the risk of litigation and dramatically improve the level of accessibility, I believe. But you can't just put an overlay or a widget on your website that does the automated remediation or adds some things to resolve a few of the WCAG guidelines and just set it and forget it. Because they're not fix-alls by any means. And I don't ever foresee them to be. We constantly work on improving the AI that drives a lot of that software. I think that overlays over the next few years are going to get substantially better, but they should never be relied on solely.
All right, that was awesome. And what a way to finish up. Thanks y'all so much for being here today. I feel like we could have done this for a little bit longer. I wish we had done in person. I think this would have been a robust in-person event too. And we will have this up on our YouTube channel. I'm going to repeat myself because I think that this is things that a lot of folks want to hear right now. So I'm in my 45-second wind down. So I'm going to say thanks to Sarah for moderating us this morning. Thanks to Graybox for supporting our technologist community. Thanks to our chairs, Nadya and Dahv. Thank you to all of our sponsors. All of our speakers, Shayla, Shaylor, Krista, Greg, and Jillian. We really appreciate your time. And most of all, thanks to those folks that attended today. Round of applause to our panelists and to you. Feel free to do that on silent in your own house or through the hands raised icons. And with that, this event is officially a wrap. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy something spooky and happy fall. And I have to say it, go Braves. I'm sorry, the World Series are happening. I can't help myself.
Oh, we're here for that, Kara.
Everybody have a great weekend.